Hi, hello guys. This is Vijay, biology lecturer from Aileba Junior College. As you know that we have started our NEET series. Based on that we are discussing about each and every chapter in detail, followed by we are discussing the practice numericals. In that category today we are going to discuss about NEET biology unit 2 biological classification. In this particular chapter today we are going to discuss about gymnosperms. Yes, talking about leaves of pinus plant. Leaves of pinus plant are of two types. One is the scale leaf or scale type of leaf, and another one is foliage type of leaf. Say for example, scale leaves, these are brownish in color and membranous structure, which are scaly on the outer look, and they are present on the long shoot which we discussed earlier, and which are protective in nature. And they protect the younger parts of the plant that could the dwarf shoot or the apical bud, and also the male cones. Now let us talk about the pinus plants leaf system. Okay, leaves which are usually present in pinus plants are of two types. One is scale type of leaf, the other one is foliage type of leaf. Scale leaves are foliage leaves. Foliage leaves which are also called as the needle shape of leaf. Now talking about scale leaves, the scale leaves which are brownish in color and membranous structure, which are scaly in structure, and they are present on the long shoot. Usually their functions are protective in nature. They protect the younger parts of the plant. Say for example, like the dwarf root, dwarf shoot system, apical buds, and the male cones. So these parts are being protected by this particular the scale leaves. Now talking about foliage leaves. Foliage leaves, as I said earlier, which are also called as needle shape leaf, and these foliage leaves are the needle leaves which are acicular in shape, which are commonly known as the needle shape, and there are number of needles for a particular species which are fixed for each foliage spur, and the needles usually they are green in color because the presence of the photosynthetic pigments, and which are usually long in size, and they involve photosynthesis too, and they are tender bases which are covered by the membranous sheath, and they are usually borne on the dwarf branches which appear in the axil of the scale leaf on long branches. So these are the two different types of leaves can be seen under the category of this pinus plant. Now let us talk about the sexual reproduction in pinus plant. Yes, so sexual reproduction is nothing but the fusion of the two different type of gametophytic cell, the male and female gametophytic cell. So before we are going to talk about this, we should know very well about the structure of the sexual reproduction, the male and female cone present in the pinus plant. Let us talk about the male cone. The male cone that could develop below the apical bud on the long shoot in a cluster like structure, and each male cone that ranges from 2 to 3 centimeter long when they are totally matured. A male cone that has the central axis on which would bear 60 to 125 microsporophylls, which are arranged in a spiral nature. Spiral, it's like a coiled nature. And this talking about this microsporophyll, and the microsporophyll that has the sterile apex and two pollen sacs which are present, microsporangia, which are also called as, and the microsporophyll that has a yellow sac like structure, which is also called as which is present on the ventral surface of the microsporophyll, and each microsporangium that contain numerous or number of microspores, which are also called as the pollen grains. Now let us talk about the pollen grains or microspore and its structure. Usually the pollen grains or the microspores are spherical in shape and which are surrounded by three different layered on its wall. The outer layer, which is also called as exine, which is found only on the upper side of the pollen grain. Similarly, the middle layer or mesocyme, which is also called as, that could cover the rest of the pollen grain and expand to form large balloon-like air sacs or wings-like structure, and the innermost layer, which is also called as intine, and they are very thin in nature. So this is about the entire structure and components present in the male reproductive organ. Similarly, in the pinus plant female reproductive organ, that is nothing but the female cone, we are going to discuss about right now. Yes, the female cone, which is present in the axil of the scale leaf near the apex region of the young branch, and which stops growing further after the formation of the female cone. Once the female cone started to produce, this could stop growing further, and each shoot that could bear 1 to 4 female cones, 1 to 4 nearly female cones which are produced. The first year female cone, which looks very small, erect, ovoid shape and pale green structure with compactly arranged megasporophylls. It is about an inch in length, 1 inch length it is usually. When it is reaching to the second year, the female cone that could be grows larger in size and reaching to 4 to 6 inch in length, and now the pale green color turns to the woody and talking about the lower scale of the megasporophyll, which is usually thin membranous structure and very small and also called as pract scale, and the upper scale that is usually large in size as comparing to the lower one, and that is stud, woody in nature and triangular in shape, which is also called as ovuliferous scale, and the two naked ovules which are born on the upper surface of ovuliferous scale towards the end, which is near to the central axis. Now let us talk about the germination of pollen grain. How good the pollen grain germinated? The pollen grain starts from the germinating present in the microsporangium, and that could produces partially developed male gametophytic cell or male gametophyte, which is consisting of two disintegrating male prothallal cell and the generating cell and a tube cell. The generating pollen grains that could carried by wind to the female cone, and the pollen tube that could enter into the tissue of the ovule. At the time of fertilization, the male gametophyte that consists of a pollen tube which is having a tube nucleus and two male gametes. The stalk and the tube nuclei that could be disintegrated during the fertilization, and the pollen tube discharges the male nuclei from the microsporangium, and one of the male gamete that could fuse with the egg which is present in the megasporangium, and they could develop for the formation of the zygote. Now let us talk about the formation of seed. The zygote forms 4 embryos, only one that could mature. The ovule that is transformed into seed, approximately 15 months it are required between the pollination and the fertilization. Cone formation to the seed dispersal needs for more than 2 years, and the seeds that could remain dormant for some time or may germinate immediately without undergoing for resting period. Seed coat that could rupture, and radicle that could gives rise to the primary taproot, and plumule forms shoot and grows upwards, and pinus constitutes embryo with many cotyledons. Yes, so these are the sexual reproduction that could take place in the pinus plant. Right. So now we have discussed in detail about the pinus plant, its general characteristic feature and structure of cone for male and female, and sexual reproduction in detail. Now let us talk about the economic importance of gymnosperms. So as we discussed earlier, about the gymnosperm, and these are the ancestor for the angiosperm, and these gymnosperm are further divided into 4 more orders, and their examples with economical importance we have discussed in detail. So let us see few more examples for the species belongs to gymnosperm and how far they are economically important to the human being. Let us talk about this. First, ornamental purposes. Many of the gymnosperm species which are native to other places, but they are cultivated in India and in Indian garden as a ornamental purposes. Say for example, like Cycas groups and Cupressus group and Araucaria group. So these all are the species are there. They are usually used for ornamental purposes or the showy purposes for the very big universities, colleges and botanical gardens and restaurant, etc. So in for making the ornamental purposes in the entrance or in the corridor or in the balcony of such a very big well established institution, we are using these type of plants for making ornamental purposes. Now let us talk about the food article. Some of the gymnosperms that could yield for many articles which are used for food directly or indirectly. Cycas circinalis is one of the species that could yield for starch from its stem and seed, and which is also called as sago. So sago is nothing but it's a starch like food product that could be produced by Cycas species, and the seeds of the pinus which are usually edible, and the nuts of the pinus which are usually edible purpose, which could bear the nutritional value of presence of starch and protein, and there are some species belongs to the order Nidales. Under this Nidales category, the young leaves which are used for edible purpose, and this is a major food, like ginkgo, the other example, ginkgols. So these are also the leaves which are used for the purpose of edible in the countries like China and Japan. So gymnosperms which are also used for the edible purpose, some of the species and its parts. Now let us talk about the wood. Many gymnosperm species which are recognized for their valuable wood, and these woods are used for the manufacturing of furnitures and for the construction purposes. And many species, say for example Apis is one of the species that could provide a light and useful wood utilized for in making of slipper, even light wood. And citrus is one of the type of species, and that could yield the strongest Indian timber that is resistant to the white ant and fungal attack, and as well as the termites attack. And Pyxia species wood that is usually used for the railway sleepers, and the wood of pinus which are used for the timber purpose, and like pinus species, many examples that could be used for the construction and the furnitures making purposes. So wood also one of the valuable product for economically importance of pinus plant. and also Pinus species and also the gymnosperms plant. Now let us talk about the medicinal value of the gymnosperms. Cycas rumpi is one of the species belongs to gymnosperm, and that could produces a resin like structure, and these resin which are used for the cure of ulcers or the wound appear on the surface of the human body. And the wood of citrus deodara that could possesses the diuretic and carminative properties, which is used for especially for pulmonary and urinary disorders and even piles and rheumatism. So these kind of issues can be cured by this particular type of species. And the leaves of cupressus that could species that could yield an essential oil which possesses the vermifuge property, and the resin which is obtained from the Pinus roxburghi is one of the species, and which is used for internally as a stomachic and as a remedy for gonorrhea. Gonorrhea is nothing but the reproductive related diseases in human being. Similarly, the seeds of the Pinus gerardiana is one of the species, and that seeds of that particular species that could yield for an oil. This oil used for applying for the purpose of dressing of wound or ulcer that appear on the surface of the body. And the species of Epthra that could yield a drug that is called epthrine, and which is used for the purpose of asthma or bronchial trouble or the pulmonary related diseases. So these all are the few examples of the medicinal value of gymnospermic plants. Now let us talk about the product which we are obtaining from the gymnosperm, say for example like resin and oil. Yes, Pinus roxburghi is one of the species that could produce the resin or oil like substances which is used for turpentine, and which is distilled to obtain origin and turpentine oil. And this resin is also obtained from Pinus vallichiana is one of the species, and the leaves and the wood of Pinus insularis species that could also yield an essential oil. And these oil or these turpentine and these resins are used for the manufacturing of many byproduct, and some of the gymnosperms that could yield medicinally important oil that already we discussed earlier. Okay, some other purposes or other uses of the gymnospermic plants, say for example like the leaves and the wood which is extracted from the Pinus insularis that is used for as a fuel purpose. Neetum contractum is one of the species that could be used for fish poison, and the bark of Neetum neeman is utilized for making of the robes, and the seeds and stems of Cycas revoluta that is used for the preparation of wine in Japan country. So these all are the few other purposes we are using for the gymnosperm plants. So far, yes, we have discussed in detail about the NEET biology unit 2 biological classification. Under this category we have discussed in detail about gymnosperm and its general characteristic feature, its habitat distribution, sexual reproduction and sexual organs, fertilization, and in detail we discussed. And followed by, in this particular category gymnosperm, we have explained in detail about a typical example of Pinus plant and its general characteristic feature, its sexual reproduction, fertilization, so in detail. And also we discussed the gymnosperm which are further classified into 4 major categories or 4 major order, like cycadales, coniferals, ginkgoals and nettles. These are the few examples of the classification when we are discussing about, right? Now, till here we are going to complete the entire topic about gymnosperm. And this particular chapter, Unit 2 Biological Classification, we will continue with one more video. In that video, we are going to discuss about angiosperm or flowering plants in detail. Until then, thank you guys.